Today I made a little over $12,000 day trading in the stock market, and in this video I'd like to tell you exactly how I did it. Throughout the course of this video I'll break down the stocks that I was watching, how I executed upon them, the risk that I used, and how I was able to do everything in between in the process of making that $12,000. With that being said, let's dive into the video. Now, before we dive into the charts here, one of the things that I would like to do first is take you into the Discord where I broke down my pre-market plan. I think it's a very crucial step for any trader who is hoping to succeed in the stock market that they have a morning plan that they can adhere to when looking for trades after the market opens. Right? So coming into the day, I had a relatively light plan. I had a solid trading day yesterday. It's been a good few days in a row. So I came in with relatively tame expectations. The market has moved up for 3 straight days coming into today, October the 11th. And knowing that, I wanted to be aware that way that I didn't put on too much risk in one direction or the other and ultimately catch myself uncomfortable with what I had put on. Right? So coming into the day, there was a few different things that I was watching. The NASDAQ had a level at 376.50, which I expected us to test. And from there, I was just thinking that we can watch for some sort of reaction. Right? I thought that if we needed a long, Tesla or Nvidia would be one of the relative strength names that we would pay attention to. And Netflix was a relative weakness name that I was watching. However, Netflix didn't have a ton of levels in the area that I could have used. So I wanted to make sure to be patient. The best looking name on the board was Nvidia with a spike under 468.83 that holds and gets back over the opening print. It can be looked at for longs into the 471 area, right? So early on in the day, I was paying attention to Nvidia for a spike under this level that got back above the level and back above the opening print as that relative strength long, while I expected the NASDAQ to be making this early morning move up into 76s, right? So the NASDAQ got that move, but unfortunately, Nvidia did not test under the level, which is the criteria that I wanted in order to take that trade. And so because I did not get the entry that I wanted in there, I did not take anything in Nvidia, and ultimately I ended up skipping that trade. Now, another trade that I was paying attention to was WHLR, I believe it is. This was a penny stock that I normally don't trade. However, I was interested in this one if we could take out the pre-market lows and get back over the opening print. We started to make that move a little bit. I took an entry, I held it, and this one ended up failing. So I ended up taking a small loss on WHR. This actually isn't a trade that I posted. Formerly, small cap niches, especially with how you can affect liquidity. I don't like to, put out there that I'm trading those just because, you can affect the liquidity between them. But this was another loss that I took on the day. And before I forget it, I wanted to just make sure to cover it very briefly. So coming into the first 10 minutes of the day, I had taken a small entry on this one, and I had no entry on Nvidia, right? Now, while neither of these two trades ended up really contributing much, the two that did were Netflix and QQQ. Now, Netflix was a relative weakness name, and early on in the morning, as we talked about, the QQQ got that upper level test at 76s. Now, one of the things that I was open-minded to trying was a higher risk entry short on one of the relative weakness names that I was paying attention to in the event that QQQ or the NQ rejected that level at 376s, which is what ended up happening, right? Now, part of me wishes I had just taken a short on the QQQ itself, as that made a solid move down. However, I did really like the potential for Netflix to be like a swing trade and for us to take an entry on this short early on in the morning. Right? So my thought process on Netflix was that we had pushed up and taken out the overnight high, right? We had taken out the pre-market highs, and we were potentially putting in a pattern that I call a failure to go higher, right? Essentially having valid reason and attempting to go higher, yet failing. When that happened, I put a stop above this high and entered into the Netflix 365 puts and was able to capture a solid move on those. I took one entry at 1.20 with a relatively loose stop loss. That was a small entry for me. I didn't get a whole lot of contracts at 120. And then I proceeded to add to that position at 1.43 once this red bar had closed and signified even more weakness in Netflix, right? From there had been a push down into the opening print, and I ended up taking a trim on my position and reducing risk. However, I won't lie, I got trapped out of my Netflix position on this green bar right here. They trapped me, they took me out. I exited in profit and it was a solid trade, but I did not end up capturing nearly the move I wanted to. And for me, that ended up kind of not being as the trade that I hoped it was, right? I hoped it was a different trade. I hoped I was able to capture a little bit more out of it. And even immediately after exiting, I felt bad because it made a solid move down. That being said, Netflix was a tricky one for the rest of the day. It did struggle to hold beneath the opening print. It gave a strong rally back to high of the day, which would have made it an extremely difficult hold while actually never stopping me out. If I held this position with my original stop loss, I never would have gotten stopped out as we never broke above this bar's high. But personally, I'm okay with how I managed it. It's not the end of the world. It wasn't the end of the world in either direction, essentially, right? So from there, the one trade that I did miss on Netflix on the day was this below the opening print. And I even sent a post out in my free Instagram broadcast channel saying, hey, Netflix is triggering beneath the opening print. If you need a short, this is something to watch. I didn't end up taking it because I thought the NASDAQ could potentially put in a range day, but ultimately this short ended up playing out very nicely down into our next level here. And I do believe that Netflix will trade this 365.08. Not sure whether it comes today or tomorrow, but I imagine it's going to be in the cards for Netflix very shortly and potentially even lower. I personally would appreciate it if Netflix wanted to kind of consolidate and go sideways for the rest of the day. That way I can participate in the move tomorrow down to this 365.08 as I'm done trading for today. But whatever the case may be, this will definitely continue to be a name that's on short watch with some relative weakness out there, right? So, which leads me to the biggest winner of the day for me, which was on QQQ. This started out as not a large position for me, and I scaled into it a little bit more once we got a little bit more confirmation, but I won't lie, this was a tricky hold, right? Essentially, after this initial morning push up into the level and pulled back beneath the opening print, we broke beneath the opening print, but really got no downward selling pressure. Despite the fact that we were beneath the open, and based on the strategy that I use, being beneath the opening print after rejecting a level for the second time would signal to us that we should potentially, right, which we also rejected the same area yesterday, it's not the same area, the exact level, that we should have traded lower. And we were really failing to go lower. The NASDAQ was continuously putting in sideways bars, which to me meant that we wanted to give that level another test. So what I did was I kept stops beneath. I kept them beneath this wick right here, and while we did wick below there once, we never got a close beneath. I did hold my position. I entered the QQQ I think it was like 357 calls. I'll check in a second. At 1.0. Oh no, excuse me. 115. It was like 111. Well, I think my fill was 112, and then added at 0.98, right? Stop loss. My stop loss was originally the 0.9 area, but I was willing to let it. I was going to wait for the candle close. The worst case scenario, I imagine I would have gotten filled out at about 0.80. Would have been my worst case scenario, right? So this trade for me wasn't an A++ setup, but it was the type of chart that I was looking at that could have returned for me a 60, 70, 80% type of return if we just got a level test. And that's all I wanted. Now, I did think that we had potential to trade all the way up into this 15, 436, 75s, which made the risk reward even better, right? That would have put our contracts up over 200% if we had gotten that upper level. But I wasn't hard set on that. I was determined and my thought process was that we would get a level test and then I would react from there, right? This ended up being a frustrating trade. It took about an hour to work, and in that hour, it almost stopped me out about 1 million times. But I remained calm. I continued to hold based on my trading plan and based on what the chart was giving me. And I was able to capture this move directly up into the level and take the majority of exit on my position. $1.58. So for me, with an average price of like 1.07, getting filled out at 1.58 on the majority of my position was an awesome trader that allowed me over 50% return on my capital at that point in time, right? So this didn't require a giant position size. I've been trading with a bit of a smaller position sizes recently because I want to get back into a rhythm as the market's been a little bit tricky. But the last 2 trading days have been awesome, and I've been very, very grateful for how everything has played out. I'll go ahead and take you now into my broker so you can see that we are at a total of $12,293 on the day. If you check my Instagram and Twitter, you will also see the live video that we had posted earlier today from my brokerage, which is Interactive Brokers. With that being said, that is all I have for you all in this video. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and go ahead and let me know down in the comments what would you like to see from me in our next video. Thanks.